So, new meta-analysis, vegetarian or vegan diets and blood lipids, a meta-analysis of randomized trials. So let's go through the whole thing point by point, and we'll try to see how we can read such a paper. So where I usually start, we already had the title. So at a glance, European Heart Journal, we don't need to be alarmed. This is a medical study because it's a meta-analysis. We want to understand what's happening there on a broader level. 3 authors, we can later check out who did what, so that's quite interesting to know. And we see this is coming from Copenhagen University, Copenhagen, Denmark, University of Copenhagen. So that's obviously something that has a specific cultural background. What's also often interesting to see, when did they submit that? Did they revise it? And when it was accepted, you see it's pretty fast. Was accepted pretty fast. So that's also interesting information, how quick they rework the whole thing. So plant-based diets are increasing steadily in popularity. So a systematic review were conducted to estimate the effect of vegetarian vegan diets on blood levels of total cholesterol, lipoprotein cholesterol, triglycerides, and another blood marker. Studies published between 1980 and 2022, searched in PubMed, Embase, and references of previous reviews. So adults over 18 years, vegetarian, vegan diets, and then lots of results. So, and what we see is that there are changes, mean difference, when it comes to cholesterol, when it comes to this blood marker. And this is coming from the plant-based diet. So total cholesterol also, but no difference when it came for triglyceride levels. And the effect size was similar across age, continent, duration of study, health status, intervention program, study design. So, conclusion, vegetarian vegan diets were associated with reduced concentration of respective blood markers, reduced the risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's a pretty big landmark study. And what's nice to learn about these medical studies is you have the key questions, you have the key findings, take-home message. I wish all papers would have that. And you can even zoom in and you can see, okay, they started really broad, threw a lot out, screened the rest, made a full text review, and ended up with 30 studies. So pretty rigorous. And even explain to you, like, the total cholesterol was reduced, density lipoprotein cholesterol was reduced, apolipoprotein B, important blood marker, reduced. So that's a nice summary right there, right? So introduction, 80 million people die from cardiovascular disease. So then they go specific into, okay, unhealthy lifestyles, all sorts of problems associated. Then they go into the blood markers, and then they say, okay, there is also, because of climate change, tendency to be vegetarian, omitting meat products, and so on. So change in diets, yet no meta-analysis with randomized controlled trials was conducted since 2007. So they want the 17. So they want to include the latest studies. And this in itself shows this typical structure, how such a paper starts rather broad and then it focuses in. So it's this funnel that we have, that we start rather broad and then it becomes more and more specific until you come here to the point we therefore conduct a systematic review of 30 studies focusing on this plant-based intervention versus omnivorous diet. So they go through pretty rigorous methods, and in medical studies this is vastly established. So plant-based diets, they say again what they do. They have certain reporting schemes, and they say when they did the search, this is really good, what this encompassed, how they searched the whole thing, how studies were included. There's often in such studies huge online appendix that you can check out, and there you have lots of information that gives you all the details. So, and then they used a systematic software. They made it with 2 people. So, and then articles only published in English. Usually most of the articles are in English, so that's not a Western bias, but that's a bias of, in terms of like randomized trials. You wouldn't expect that from many other languages. Maybe it's increasing in Chinese. bit Spanish and French, but I checked this in many reviews before, and it's mostly published in English. They did a bit something that surprised me, because they had the body mass index included. There's many studies that debunked it and that showed it's a weak predictor. Still, I think they included it because it goes back a long time, and it's included in many of these studies. So much has now shown that body mass index can have a huge variance, and it doesn't matter for health indicators, but still most studies included it, and I think this is why they rely on it. It's a bit unfortunate. So, and then they go into data synthesis and statistical analysis, and then you see this is a really long thing. They explain the Cochrane handbook, so that's an important thing. That's the standard in medicine, so that's on a very high level. That's to be expected from such a high-propelled paper. Fortunately, you use the starter software. That's in clinical studies, also in branches of economics still established. So, and they even used something called Cochrane statistics. So these are statistics that are well established for these kind of meta-analytical trials. They performed a sensitivity analysis, so they checked how reliable are the results if we leave certain parameters, certain studies out. They give such a big overview. We had this in the summary. So it's again, you check the numbers, you check what happened there, what was thrown out for which parameters, and then you end up with the 30 studies. They made a bias assessment. Probably not the bias you're thinking. This is again based on the Cochrane review. It's very much focusing on this context of these studies. So describe the whole thing. Again, what they had in the figures, a little bit redundant, but still relevant to report this once more. Then you see huge bias on the US, Sweden, Finland. It's interesting, right? How many studies were published in the US and how few in other countries? The intervention range, that's also interesting to know. Sample sizes, that's quite relevant. And then other respective parameters that were also interesting, that are a little bit, when we later go to the subgroups, giving us a bit more information there. Risk of bias. So here they say very clearly, okay, this was not blinded, because how can you blind a vegan diet? So randomization process, not really clear in some studies. How people participated. Self-reporting is the word that you're looking for here. So that's a bit. And then also different markers that were used over different time spans. So all this is being described in detail. The results of the blood lipid levels. So there you have table 2. That's a pretty big one. So there you can compare all these different things. But the main things are given here with negative values being reported, and no changes in overall triglycerides. So that's pretty interesting, right? And then there's even negative values in the specific blood marker that we will later see in the graphics. Subgroup analysis, so there's all sorts of smaller things, and there you see the real grade of detail in this paper. Supplementary. So there's much information hidden in the online appendix where you can read lots of things. There's so much there if you want to check it out. So publication bias, again, supplementary, and you already see how much figures they must have put into this supplementary appendix, right? And comes a whole table, which you need to flip a bit for yourself. And there you always see the studies. It's in increasing time span. So, and you see where they come from, how long, you see certain markers. As I said, BMI would criticize that, mean age. And then you see also more information, for instance, which intervention, what was the control, and so on. So, and this you have for all the studies. And then you have the discussion, usually in this case starting with a short summary. So that's again nice. Then you see, okay, what are the most important things that they found? And then you can, and you always need to pause the video, right? If you want to read that, you just pause the video and you read through it. So they go through previous studies, which were already mentioned, and then they explain the findings in order to discuss it. So they go a little bit deeper into all the medical details that If you want to go down this rabbit hole, if you want to read more about it, you can. But the main results you already had, right? And what you get in any meta-analysis, I mean, you see, there's like all the details. Like they go into the different diets. So for instance, here you have the Mediterranean diet, you have dietary assessments, all the different cholesterols, diet rich in plant foods. So many details that are really interesting to read if you have the time. But the main things in the meta-analysis, and this is again ordered by years, it's where are the strongest effects, where you have the biggest variance. So you see here, it's right on average, huge variance. So what's that study? You need to find out. Here, pretty low value, also huge variance. But then here, also not like pretty low, little variance, right? So you need to always try to compare, why is this happening? And you can go back to the table. Grousey is the latest one here, second latest one. And there you see, okay, there's like all sorts of markers, but it doesn't give me a lot. So I go into the real baseline data. That's a study from Iran, 3 months. Is focusing on overweight and obese people. There is no lipid-lowering therapy. That's pretty important. And vegetarian diet is compared to omnivores, right? So, and that's with the weight loss diet even, right? So that's pretty interesting that you can see, okay, this is what this study found, and it had a rather strong effect. So you not even vegan, vegetarian diet had a strong effect. Now you can compare this to the LDL cholesterol. And there you see, again, pretty strong effect in this study. So you can always look at the individual data and you learn a lot from it. That's the helpful thing. Triglycerides, we already read in the abstract, no significant difference. And then there was the smaller blood marker that was only in some few studies, and there you see still strong effect. Huge variance, right? Both in terms of like when this was conducted, when you see you have this group and you have this group. So it would be interesting to see what's the difference between the two. And you can make sure with these authors, they have something about that in the supplementary. But you can find out for yourself. They gave you the table. There you have this figure. So you can go through all that. And in the end, they say in conclusion, consumption of vegetarian vegan diets reduces blood levels and so on. Right? And reducing the growing burden of... Nah, I don't like that. The ending with an acronym, come on. Just find it out, right? So, huge supplementary material funded by the Lundbeck, the Danish Heart Foundation, and the Leduc Foundation. No conflict of interest, and you can see they started the whole thing, did the whole work. They did the supervision, and this person has the final responsibility. So if you go back, this is what usually then the last author has the responsibility. Also communication, has the email address, this person. So, and now you know how you can go through such a paper quickly, and you can use this information. You can really go deeper and deeper. You can compare all the different studies. You can dig in if you want, but within 10 minutes, you get the most out of this study. And that's the important point. You got the main patterns, you understood, okay, it has an impact. Science checks out. It's a lot of studies. There is some variance. That's to be expected. And still, the overall effect is rock solid. That's good information right there. This is gold standard science. So that's why it's so nice to read these papers. I will occasionally try to follow up. Check the media for interesting new papers, and we'll discuss them here.